running slightly behind schedule, so I'll quickly rush in my next panel. It's again a power-packed one, and it also talks about being sustainable in the long run because it talks about the marathon concept. So it's a CEO's agenda, retail marathon, how the most successful CEOs keep on reinventing their businesses to stay on top of the game. So guys, your panel is coming after a very power-packed panel in the morning. I don't know if any one of you were here. Big debate between online, offline, how traditional retail is playing out. But in your case, the whole idea, I think, is of sustenance, how brands are really going to play the game in the long run. Venu, let me start with you. And I think the last time I was here with you, we picked on the strategy of how retail in India actually had to innovate, improvise based on the customer things. Marry that with the kind of sustenance power that you need to survive an Indian market, because in the online space, somebody asked in the morning, what's the benchmark of ROI or how do you define success? How do you approach the problem now, having seen all the changes?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Shivnath, yes, from the last time, and absolutely relevant and continues to hold good. I think innovation and continuously relooking at your model and tweaking it is very, very important for sustenance and keeping to grow. I think if you look at the Marks & Spencer story in India and innovating on our product, on our environment, and combining that with smart merchandising is helping us to continue to grow in this country, continuing to record double-digit growth, and most importantly, enhancing lives of our customers. And I think that's obviously what we aim to achieve. Enhancing lives is what we are doing, and we do that by innovating, by having better merchandising, smarter merchandising, and combining all of that to offer a great environment for our customers to shop.
No, in terms of, but planning it ahead, because the kind of rate of change that we're seeing, and I think one of the factors being debated in the morning is, for the online guys, for example, technology is changing pretty fast. Traditional retailers may not be adhering to that. In your business, how are you managing the rate of change? I mean, the vision could be enhancing lives, but how are you grappling with challenges which come with rate of change?
Yeah, I think for us, obviously, the brick and mortar is the key for us, and that's the space that we are playing in. And expanding, reaching out to the customers and being where the customers is the most important thing. And space is a challenge, and finding good quality space is an even bigger challenge. And one of the innovations or one of the different things which we have done specifically for India is we created lingerie and beauty as a space. Now, creating an environment where the customer can shop privately, but at the same time, bringing in the best of what we offer. We are known for being one of the best retailers for innerwear, and creating a model where you get a smaller space dedicated for lingerie and beauty, bringing in the best of our products in terms of style, in terms of fashion, but at the same time combining with comfort and fit. And that offers the opportunity to be able to get the best of our products easily closer to a home.
So in terms of the related genre, Shailesh, if I may come to you after you've sipped your water, for the brand that you represent, and you're yourself a good brand ambassador of that as well, but the kind of changes that are happening in the morning, we talked a lot about where India is compared to China, about 7 to 10 years behind in terms of the consumption boom. Do you see the dynamics playing in your favor today? Because Nagesh had a nice quip in the morning saying, I've been here 10 years, everybody talks about the golden age in that particular year. It's like gold is never going to vanish in the retail sector. Suresh had a nice line saying, God lies in retail. God lies in this room as well. How are you managing to bring that changed environment into your day-to-day strategy, whether it's people's management or operations management?
See, we were, Shivnath, a bit lucky at Tommy Hilfiger because a little more than 3 years back, the Tommy International, the PLC, Tommy Corp, took the stake in India business. And they came on board, and that opened a lot of doors for us as an organization and for employees. What happened is that, when you're part of that big corp and which is there for 30 years and they have sort of very well fine-tuned operation, it helped us to draw on that base to help the India organization. So, for example, training. So, for merchandising, immediately after they took over, we sent our people to Germany for a training. Germany is one of the largest market in the world for Tommy. And the kind of, science behind the merchandising, the planning of the stock, that was quite sort of welcome for our organization. So we sort of leapfrogged in our learning on the merchandising, for example. Or I can give you another example that this year is our 10th anniversary in India, and Mr. Hilfiger is coming down to celebrate that. And what they do globally for similar event, it is like, again, a very fine-tuned sort of art and a science. And we will have Hollywood musicians and, the Mr. Hilfiger and our global team coming down to, help us do an event of very global standard. And our organization is fortunate to learn these things. We wouldn't have probably done a lot of these things if we were on our own as a separate organization. But since we got access to very fine-tuned machinery global, and our organization is learning and sort of moving forward to service the Indian consumers with that learnings.
So you're saying bring in the world best practices, do not make India into a market which is to be left behind, treat it like a more contemporary market and treat it like an equal partner in the global retail scene.
And I must say the platform like IRF, etc., created that sort of a noise about the Indian retail, that today worldwide India retail is respected, and there is a keenness and there is an enthusiasm about sort of doing well. So the best practices are offered on the plate to India. So we are that way fortunate, though it's still a emerging small market. But I don't think we ever had any issue of getting access to the best practices, and not just in Tommy, but my previous experience with Benetton in Hong Kong or in Esprit in India. Because everybody saw India in a certain important light, we always got that access that helped the organization here.
All right, let me hop across to the food genre, and I'll come back to Mr. Raghunandan and Sriram as well. Naren, I learned a lot from you the last time. I think you have some hidden talents as well, which everybody else was witness to in terms of the creative part of life. But in your business, somebody said here in the morning, the way retail is changing, the question to ask is not what is going to change. The question you have to ask is what is not going to change. And if you look at that environment, to recalibrate strategy, especially in your business, because the product is extremely fast moving, do you have to run faster than the change that is happening around you?
Sure. So firstly, I don't know which creative talents that you're referring to. I'm Naren, I work for Yum. Yum brands is Pizza Hut, KFC, and Taco Bell. We have over 700 stores in India right now, growing at about one new store every 2 days. So I think our agenda is to create shareholder value. And I believe in India, to be able to do that, you need to have an agenda that has both ambition, but also compassion. Both elements are important, ambition and compassion. And I think what you talked about, given the change in the environment and the unique challenges in India, I think one has to constantly innovate. And by innovation, I mean it is about doing different things and doing things differently till you're able to create an impact on ambition and compassion and create shareholder value. So I'll give you 3 specific areas how we think about doing different things and doing things differently or innovate. 3 areas. One is making our brands much stronger. Second, making our business model much stronger. And third, making a compassion agenda of giving back much stronger. I'll give you a few quick examples. So on the brands much stronger and innovating on the brands, I think it's about both listening to consumers, your existing consumers, and also not listening to your consumers. You want innovation through both lenses. I don't think you can innovate only by listening to consumers. You very often have to stop listening to consumers. So therefore, some examples of how we are strengthening our brands. KFC, we launched a vegetarian range of products. If you listen to our existing consumers, they tell us that is anathema, never do it. But we believe it strengthens the brand. We also launched rice bowl meals, etc., which have broadened the appeal of the brand considerably. Or say Taco Bell that we launched, which obviously we can't do beef as a meat block in India. So we've launched a whole vegetarian menu in Taco Bell. So making our brands stronger by making them more relevant to the local consumers, making them more affordable, I think is the first pillar. The second one is about strengthening your business model. So as a wise man once said, that in India, you can never do with the best practice. You need the next practice, because most of the things don't quite work in India. And I therefore believe that a business model in India is one in which in retail we have to be used to having modest margins given the high cost pressures we have. And therefore we need a very high asset velocity or high asset turnover. So the business models that we need to have in India have to have an element of innovation that can make the brand relevant across many day parts and different channels. So for example, for us, online e-commerce becomes very important. Home service, home delivery, breakfast, pre-lunch, lunch, post-lunch, dinner, post-dinner. We'd love our customers to even sleep in our stores if they can. So that's the business model innovation. And the third one is also to innovate on the compassion agenda, giving back. Because I think in India, it is extremely important not only to have the ambition piece, but also compassion and constantly innovate. So we have some important causes, like we have a big agenda is diversity, especially gender diversity. So we opened our first all-woman KFC in Darjeeling, with all basically employing only women employees in that particular store. We have diversity targets in terms of women employability in our stores, and also take up the cause of hearing and speech impaired in a big way. We have about 500 hearing and speech impaired employees, etc. So I think innovating to get better, to do things differently, do different things across the brand, business model, and the compassion agenda is the way in which we're approaching it.
And you've been extremely successful. Eddie, coming to your kind of offering in the food genre, which is quite different from what Yum Brands does in the country, and starting from that one store to begin with in Bandra to now pretty much looking at all the big metros, experimenting with new things, bringing in new culture. You must be trying to experiment which Indian customer has not faced. A lot of these things the Indian customer wants, likes, knows about, but the pop-ups, for example, what you're doing right now. What are you trying to achieve out of this? You think experimentation, maybe then something will work, or you're pretty much confident that, this is what is going to work, I'm going to try this out?
Hi, I'm A.D. Singh, MD of the Olive Bar and Kitchen Group. We're always looking at the market, and the restaurant business, I'd say, is somewhat similar to the larger retail business. We're seeing the same changes, similar new demographics emerging. As a company, I could see 3-4 years ago that there's a great emergence of new customers into the market, younger, and as such, they were wanting more casual, affordable experiences. So over the last 3 years, our company, Olive, has in fact developed a set of new brands which reach out to this new audience. And these brands now are the backbone of the company and the future of the company. And I think that is the India story for the restaurant business, is about affordability, approachability, casualness. Our business, which was a fine dining business, in that sense is heading towards your business, where it can reach out to a much wider audience. The role of innovation across the spectrum of our brands is very key, because now competition has become much more. Where we were trendsetters in being Mediterranean, at that time a lot of customers weren't even clear what Mediterranean food was. Now there are many fairly decent cafes, delis, bistros in your neighborhood. So we have to innovate even within our brands. And what you were just mentioning as an example, the Olive that we have at the Mahalakshmi Racecourse, I'm sure some of you have seen that, was struggling a bit because of the uncertainty of the leases in that area, that whole turf club area. And so we created a new concept. It's frankly a new concept, I think almost worldwide, of creating pop-ups that were not there for a weekend, but actually were for a season. So last season we brought in a brand from Goa, a Greek brand, and this season we brought in one of our own brands. And these pop-ups have really energized our business. When we brought in the new brand, business went up 2.5 times in the first month. So I think in this market, the need to innovate with new ideas is critical. And we're doing that in many, many ways. I'll be happy to share some again later on.
I'll come back to you on that. Let me come from the real estate point of view, because space, the offline model still survives, brick and mortar is still going to be one of the mainstays, because in the morning the whole debate was, will online destroy it? But DLF and your experience, over the last few years I've seen debates here talking about real estate prices, footfalls not converting into sales. How has your engagement with retailers added to your perspectives about if you had to be a marathon runner and not a sprinter in retail?
Yeah, I think from a DLF and a real estate developer's perspective, this marathon is probably the right word for it. It cannot have any short-term goals. It has to be looking at it from a very long term. In this, there are, I think we work at two levels and work deeply at both these levels. One is with the retailers. The retailers are the ones who understand their business very well, who understand how to get the consumer into the malls. And we not only work with them by making our malls and retail experience absolutely safe, but also sustainable and creating the customer delight. At the same time, we work very closely with the retailers, including taking the risk along with them to grow the businesses in the long run. So, at the same time, we cannot close our eyes to the consumer. And from that perspective, we believe that as time passes, there is going to be a seamless experience from the consumer perspective, from the brick and mortar and online or e-commerce and whatever else name you give it. But the touch and feel of the product will continue to be an important aspect. And therefore, a lot of commoditized products may continue to go onto the digitized platform. But the value-added products, where we believe the retailers will continue to innovate, will continue to have a very strong anchor in the brick and mortar business.
Interesting. So a clear segregation in that sense. Mr. Raghunandan, if I may ask you to add your perspective. Last year, I remember a couple of years ago, you did a big panel and you had some interesting insights about how the industry was evolving. But what Sriram is saying, do you really think Indian consumer, because of adoption of technology or online retail model, will be able to segregate their basket of choice that judiciously and the kind of challenges that throws up to retailers?
Yeah. I'll come to that, and I'll sort of take a step back and tell you how we are trying to differentiate and therefore bring in the experience bit. What we are trying to do is not build better malls than anybody else. I think we're trying to have a completely differentiated product. We have one existing center in Surat. We're building another 6 centers. The underlying theme is connecting communities. And that's what we're trying to do. You engage with retailers, you engage with consumers, but overall, if you don't connect with the community you live and are surrounded by, we believe there will be no connect. And ultimately, the mall will not succeed. So how do you go about this? Connecting communities. We've tried various different things in Surat. Most of them, I'm happy to say, are working. For example, unlike a typical mall, the effort is not maximization of FSI, but really maximization of the experience that customers will have. So there's huge amount of pedestrianization. There's a lot of emphasis on artworks and so on in a mall. There are a lot of cultural events which are held. So just trying to draw closer and closer connect to the community. The second thing we're trying to do to be different and to differentiate ourselves is we are investing heavily in building a brand. Traditionally, I don't know of too many mall developers who've consciously built a brand in India. And that means, in today's context, increasingly in the social media. So I think there's a massive amount of work going on there. The third trend we're noticing, and this is where we're trying to value add with retailers, is retail is becoming completely experiential if you have to survive in the brick and mortar world. So we're telling them, relook at the way you do your stores. I'll give you a couple of small insights. We've spoken to a few retailers. For example, we're noticing a trend where youngsters come in to a store, fashion store, and try out various clothes, get photographed, send it to their friends for approval. If the friends like it, then they buy it. So we're telling them, change the way you've organized the store, have really jazzy, spruced up changing rooms, because that's making a difference. Not the traditional thing where you have space which can't be utilized, which is otherwise the changing room. So just as an example, I think these things are beginning to make a difference. Food and beverage, you've got two experts here. We're trying to make it completely experiential. I don't think we'll do another mall with the typical food court kind of model in a mall anymore. It doesn't work because every second mall has the same food court anyway. So can I have the best kitchens in the city? Can I have completely experiential F&B? That's how we're trying to look at it.
So interesting. So a lot of takeaways which I understand and which is a good point to bring in. Augustine, you've heard all these brands, some Indian, some not Indian, but working in the Indian context and the kind of brands you've represented in the past. The Indian market is changing, one in the online, offline context. But as Mr. Raghunandan also said, Sriram also said, the experiential offering that a brand has or a mall has is also a big value add now, big layer that you have to think through. Bring in your international perspective to tell us how is this going to change and how is it becoming a challenge or an opportunity for retailers?
Okay, hello. Actually, I've been only 3 days here in India, my first
perfect.
time.
All the more better.
So I've been around the city and the shopping malls. Actually, you see, Mumbai to me resembles me of Brazil, pretty much similar
Are you
to
from Brazil as well?
No, I'm from Chile.
Okay.
But resembles me Brazil. Very strong city, a lot of movement. You get great brands at the stores. One thing that Brazil is not doing is that they're pretty much protective of their industries. Here I can see a lot of brands coming in and bringing in their formats like Mango, Hackett. I understand that H&M is also here, but if not, it will come, okay? So certainly today, for the local retailers particularly, it's becoming a big, big challenge. The experiential, the product, the innovation. Because all the good brands, all the big players are going to be everywhere. Primark, H&M, Zara, you name it, Mango, Desigual, whatever, okay? That is already happening in Latin America, particularly Chile, a very open country, no tariffs, no duties, anybody can stand up a business in, I don't know, in 1 day, okay? So for Chile, it's very difficult. We are only 17 million people, okay? We have more than 23 China cars brands in Chile for 17 million people. So it's pretty challenging, okay? In my experience as a CEO for a department store, the most important thing was always to innovate, always bring the new stuff, always bring the new brands to the country, always propose new things. That's why we kept a lot of the time looking very much at what was happening around the world, looking at what the good guys were doing, okay? If we had to improve our consumer electronics department, okay, we would not go to Macy's or to Bloomingdale's or whatever, or Sears. We would go to Best Buy. We would go to, what's it called, the other one from Spain?
We have Chroma here.
I can't remember the name. But we would go to the specialist. If we needed to improve the teens department, we would go to the teen specialist. And that created a very big fight, a very big war between the department stores, okay, in Chile. There's 3 chains, each of them having 50 stores. So you can count it's 150 stores, department stores for 17 million people. The prices obviously are much lower than other countries surrounding us because we don't have any tariffs, okay? But also it becomes a major challenge expanding into other countries, okay? And typically you see going to Brazil is very difficult, very, very difficult. A lot of taxes, different taxes between different regions. Today, Latin America slice it in half between the Atlantic Rim and the Pacific Rim. And you can see that the countries on the Pacific Rim are the ones that are promoting trade. A lot of brands coming in. Colombia, 40 million people country, a lot of brands going in. But Argentina, another country that is very much restrictive about trade, they have no brands. All the brands are local. Okay? Right. So there's a big opportunity for brands to go into Latin America, and that poses a major, major threat for all the locals.
So interesting. I think you'll have a very adventurous ride in India, given that you're only 3 days old into the country. Everybody's talking about innovation, experiential offering. Then if I may go back to you, the people process is kind of an integral part of this so-called experimentation that you have to do, the innovation you have to do. lot of times it has been said that the demographic dividend in the country could turn out to be a demographic disaster because of the lack of training ability, the lack of absorption processes into the systems. Is that turning out to be a challenge, or how are retailers grappling with it could be one of the biggest potential threats. Even in the online space, for example, the last mile is still somebody who's going and delivering. How much power, empowerment does he have to reject a product? I think Amazon and Snapdeal had an interesting perspective on that. So the people process part of it, how are you grappling with that?
So I think that's a really big challenge. Ironical, actually, because we're a country of 1.2 billion people. And yet, I think finding the right quality of manpower, I think, is a challenge that I think everybody faces. And therefore, I think for corporates, we have to own skill building ourselves. And how can you create a pipeline of talent right from the front line all the way up the organization? So just to give you a perspective, we are currently employing a total of about 35,000 people. And every year we have a challenge of employing about 10 to 15,000 people a year, given, people turnover and so on. So this is a significant challenge. We're obviously in the big metros where all the other retailers are. The talent pool is limited. So how do you really expand the talent pool? So some thoughts on that front is that at every level in the organization, we've come up with learning interventions to expand the talent pool. So at the team member level, which is the kids who serve in our restaurants at the front counter, we get them in from various NGOs, etc., and give them life skills, give them customer skills, and make them employable so that they can do that job efficiently. At the next level, then we found that these team members cannot become supervisors because they don't have the necessary skills. So we've launched a project called Project Horizon, where we teach them supervisory skills. Then we found, again, there was a ceiling that they cannot grow further up the chain, and therefore we give them incentives to do graduation, or even if they're restaurant general managers, for them to have access to MBA degrees and so on. So I think that if you have a challenge of that scale of having to employ 10 to 15,000 new people every year, you almost have to have a very robust process of creating your own level of skill building right from the point of entry all the way up. So you create your own sort of pipeline of talent development. So that's some of the stuff that we're doing.
So, Adi, in your perspective, especially in the F&B industry, given that you have to keep on experimenting, how are you managing to keep running that race of people skills running ahead of what you have to offer? Because eventually, your people have to master the product before they are able to offer it to others. And it ranges from the person who makes the food to the guy who actually gets it.
As a company, I'm very proud this last year of two initiatives that Olive started, which I think fairly pioneering in the food industry in the country. One is that we introduced what is fairly prevalent across the IT companies, the ESOP scheme for our top managers. And last year, 14 managers benefited from that. We're not a limited company, we're not a listed company, but we have transactions every 3-4 years. And the opportunity area for our best managers, therefore, is fairly substantial. And I think that has helped us retain all our top managers, and also is helping us attract a new pool of talent to join us because we're standing out. I really do believe that the only way to solve the attrition problem, and of course it's very hard to do that across 35,000 people, but is if they have a little piece of the pie, however small it is. That's the only way really that you're going to be able to keep people as they grow in the face of increasing competition. The second thing that we did last year in the restaurant company, we're a fairly small company, is we were able to offer the opportunity for 2 of our best people to become partners with us in a new company that we started. They own 40% of that company and they run it. These were 2 of our best people. They were doing very well for the company. We knew that they would leave us and go to become either entrepreneurs or to our competitors. So they put in money, we formed a company, it's doing very well, it's adding great value to the parent company as well. And I think it's also helping us both keep the people we have and again attract new talent, because you see, finally, there's a chance for them to be entrepreneurs within the umbrella of an organized company. And I think these are 2 of the initiatives that are helping us at the managerial level, at the lower level, we are also grappling with much the same set of problems.
But do you think, as Naren said, as you scale up, do you think these kind of innovations in people management is one way to resolve the whole retail challenge?
I think so. I think we, as a bit of a mom and pop company, have a lot to learn from companies like yours. So I'm actually taking notes as you're talking.
So Eddie, just one other thing I'd love to share is that I think you touched upon that. I think when you have a significant people challenge like we have in the retail business, I think it is so important, the engagement aspect, which we do by ensuring that we have a very unique culture that allows the employees to feel that they have a job with a purpose, that they are part of something much bigger than just the daily sort of employment and interaction with customers. And we call that like a big heart agenda. And we say, listen, we are not only about, like I said, ambition, but also compassion. We have a responsibility towards nutrition, towards a community, towards our environment. And we enable our employees to be able to connect and give back in some way, so that right down at every store level, so that they feel that they're actually doing much more than just transacting for the sake of business. It's that sort of business with purpose, which then helps create that level of engagement and commitment and therefore retention as we build this big pipeline of our employees.
Interesting, and I think what Eddie has done is worth admiring, because sharing wealth at the very start is something very commendable. So congratulations on that. But let me ask one thing to the fashion kings, if I may. Shailesh, to begin with, this retail forum, we are not really hearing this whole thing about tier 1 city, tier 2 city, tier 3 city. It seems that India is suddenly one big unified market, because online actually does not differentiate between that. But given that you are still known as a brick and mortar in some ways, and the consumerist culture expanding beyond the metros, what are the challenges you're facing there? Is it still about curiosity and not conversion? Is it still about experience doesn't really matter, they just need the product, wham, bam, and get out of there?
In smaller tier cities?
Yeah, in smaller tier cities. I mean, metros, I guess you have mastered the art in some ways or the other.
Srinath, we just opened our 50th city last fortnight in Mangalore. There's a new Forum Fizza Mall that started. That's our 50th city in India. So, frankly, we have covered every possible tier, you could say. Now we are in tier N, actually. This journey, this is the 10th anniversary of the brand in India. I mean, after the first 4 or 5 years, which were the big metros, the Bombay, Delhi, Hyderabad, the usual suspects. And Ahmedabad was the first city that we went, which was smaller. Now, Ahmedabad, by no stretch of imagination, is a smaller city. And also the mall owner was to be our franchisee. And he said, take anything, I'll invest, don't bother. But we were very, very cautious, and we took half the size of the store that was offered to us. And also our competitor was taking, so the ego was also getting hurt. But we said, no, not about ego, we want to do well. So we took a smaller store in Ahmedabad city, and we were so paranoid about failure because sort of a relatively smaller city, that we over-invested in that business, and including senior management trips regularly. Before the store opened, we went 6 times to make sure the store was coming out right, the staff. We had a lot of, that time, question in our mind about the quality of staff, because general perception was that in Gujarat the English standards were not that good, and we wanted to project a very global international feel, and the diction had to be right, and the personality had to be right. We were very fortunate. We got probably some of the best staff. They spoke good English. They're very confident, though we needed them to speak Gujarati also, because that was important, but we wanted them to also be quite global in some sense. And it was a runaway success for us. It's still one of the best markets for us in the country. Now that gave us the confidence, and then we went to Indore. We had a similar experience in Indore, very successful. Went to Banaras, UP, and we felt that it will not work. We'd worked in Banaras, and we kept sort of expanding, and kept seeing success. And we used to joke in 8, 9 sort of recession that these are the towns, they don't read Economic Times, they don't watch CNBC, so no problem here. Let's keep expanding. We got very good rentals also that time, and today we are in 50 cities. So we have seen seen them all actually now. And we just last week did a round of how many more cities that we want to be present. We just came across with 5 odd cities, at Trivandrum where we want to be. Calicut we are opening the mall coming up, Highlight Mall, we will be there. Patna, for some reason the store is still under construction for 2 years, but Patna is another city that we want to be. Srinagar is another in our wish list. So just not more than 5 cities that are immediate target. So we have seen good response, same aspirations. The rich guys in smaller towns want the same thing as rich guys in big cities. They also travel for holidays. So there's a convergence of the aspirations in smaller tier cities with the big metros.
Venu, any big challenge that you face?
I think I would agree with Shailesh, and if I look at it from a slightly different perspective, Marks & Spencer is a retailer for the entire family. So we offer across menswear, women's wear, kids wear, lingerie, and within each of them we have formal wear, smart wear. And what we have found, we are now in 18 cities and we are expanding. We added 4 last year. I think we'll add another 5 to 6 this year, and we are going into newer cities each time. And each of the cities, what we find is that the aspiration levels, the products that we sell are pretty much the same. And we have tried different permutations, combination. Again, when we first went in, there was, our own perception was it's much more value. They're looking for cheaper product, etc. But I don't think that's really true. People are looking for, the aspiration levels the same. What they're looking for is pretty much the same. I think the only difference is it's a smaller mass. So our target customer, when you go into a smaller city, and just by the fact that it's a smaller city, you're a smaller target customer. The only big difference we find is the level of westernization on women's wear. So for us, that's one area where we find, and especially smart wear. So formal smart wear tends to be less used, or less, the target customer there is much smaller. It's more casual driven compared to most of the bigger cities. That's the one difference we would find. But other than that, I think the aspiration levels, what they're looking for is pretty much the same as the big cities.
Right. Mr. Raghunandan, given that, before I open it up to the audience for questions, it seems that India is on a good wicket from a lot of geopolitical, political, social, economic factors. This whole 0809 gloom and doom kind of a thing that, real estate is going to be the biggest disaster in terms of how retail is going to be defined, and redoing all the agreements, the REITs, figuring out, are we not putting that challenge on the radar anymore? That's off the table, that's all sorted. You guys have all figured out how it's going to move from here on?
No, I think what's changed is 2 things. I think we're seeing many more brands in the market. We're seeing many more consumers coming and shopping now. If I take this year, particularly the last few months, and the retailers here can tell you, I think they've been a lot more positive than for the last couple of years. So a lot more optimism. I think the real issue, it's not about, ultimately I keep telling everybody, this is not about rent and CAM and whatever, people usually talk about. For me, the whole issue is, and now we're focusing on it very sharply, is all about trading density. How productive is retail in this country? All these discussions will stop the moment retailers are productive. And how are they productive? If you've got the right center in the right location, it's managed well, you have adjacencies which are good, the mix is good, the mall is managed well. That's how trading densities will go up. You promote it with community, whatever you want to do. Ultimately, for me, it's trading density. All these discussions will stop if trading density goes up.
All right. Sriram, quick observation? Because you stand to gain if the supply is...
Yeah, sure. As I mentioned earlier, our business model is that we take a risk along with the retailers. So a large percentage of our retailers who are our tenants are on revenue share models. So we try to back them up completely in trying to bring the best footfall into the malls. And I think that will also drive. I agree with Raghu to an extent, but ultimately all of us work for a bottom line. And therefore, I think whilst we definitely look at long-term sustainable solutions for the retailers, tenants, and the consumers, I think we have to continuously focus on ensuring how do we give the best return to the shareholder also. And I think that is what drives us to ensure that we give the best products, we give it in the best environment that increases the scale of the retailers. And therefore, a strong bottom line orientation always helps in trying to drive the business.
All right, we'll open it up further, but Augustine, just one global perspective. Some of the brands that you've represented in the past, or the kind of high-end brands, in India seem to suffer because they eventually have to go for the real high real estate kind of a space, and then the bottom lines don't make sense, and we have seen more global brands actually shut down because they were on the high street. And that's always a limiting factor for those brands to sustain and survive in the long run. So what's been the global experience? You have a point to make on that?
I have a point to make. That's exactly what I said, that as we are moving forward in real estate, most of the long-term agreements we signed with the brands are on revenue share. So that puts very limited pressure on them in terms of profitability and in terms of giving a fixed return to the landlord.
You've figured out a solution already.
Yeah.
Augustine, what's been the international experience, the real estate factor in high-end retail?
In my experience, Latin America, as a general, started very strong in street retail, okay? But the entrance of big shopping malls have basically taken all of the retail to the shopping malls, okay? I can see a difference, for example, in Europe, the street retail is very, very strong, very strong. You can find a store there at a reasonable rent and sell. In several cities, maybe in Santiago, for example, in Santiago de Chile, you don't find street retail good enough to sell, unless it's convenience or other kind of services. But for brands, if you're not at a shopping mall, it's impossible to build up the brand.
All right, so the mall integration is what is key eventually in the long run.
I guess that in the US, it's pretty similar, unless you are obviously in New York or Chicago or in downtown, okay?
Well, we'll wait for that to happen. Questions for this panel? Very quickly, we have very little time, I can see. Okay, we can take a couple of questions. Anybody for the panel with any question regarding the challenges of retail? Yes, could you come to the mic, please? And keep it short if possible. And don't say it's to the entire panel.
Good afternoon. This question is for Mr. Raghunandan and Mr. Khattar. As you all were talking about the mix, that it should be an experience for the customer. I have started a new venture called the Celebrity Store, which is into celebrity merchandise and collectible. It is the first store of its kind. Our experience has been slightly different when talking to malls. As Mr. Khattar was saying, that you all are more into revenue sharing. But again, there's an asterisk, terms and condition apply, where the minimum guarantee being quoted along with the revenue share is so high that it normally turns out to be 20 to 30% of your monthly sale. So would actually be malls in the future be willing to handhold entrants like us who have niche experiential product range and help us through that first 2 or 3 years to reduce our break-even period and gather the strength to come into this retail?
That's for you.
I'll then pass it on to Sriram. Okay.
I think that please, both for startups and also for established brands. We would also welcome that, actually.
Listen, I'll again go back to the last point I made. Ultimately, it's a measure of the kind of business potential you think you can get out of that location and whether you think it's viable or not. I mean, if somebody is telling you and you're going to operate at 30%, I'd say don't. Because you'll never make money. I mean, unless you're in some business which has got some 500% margin, don't. It just won't work. So I think one of the things I've tried to do over the last few years consciously, and many retailers don't like this, is we've actually tried to reduce space. Because let me give you a typical line store, an inline store, will be probably more productive at 700 or 750 square feet than at 1200 or 1400. But everybody wants a big store, they want mannequins, they want a big window, they want to establish a presence. But they'd be far more productive and make a lot more money with a smaller store. That's...
Sriram?
Just to give you an example, the Mall of India, which is coming up in Noida at 2 million square feet, is the largest mall that's going to open in the country. And taking up from what Raghu said, if we were working, we are working with about 400 brands who are going to open there. And if we had to go by the wish list that they had, we would probably have to open a mall which is at least 4 to 5 million square feet. and our break-even on or our return on investment would come in the 11th year. So I think there's always a balance that one has to create in terms of the aspirations that are there for the tenants and the consumers, and what you can offer them based on your return of investment. And that's a very important element in any business, whether it is retail, whether it's real estate, whether it is digitization or any platform that we have.
This is a question for Mr. Chaudhary. Brands like yours, food brands like yours, and beverage brands like Pepsi and Coke are being blamed for the increase in obesity and diabetes around the world. How do you cope with that?
Well, I think brands like ours and other brands in similar category, I think, have to be very responsible and have a very clear, proactive agenda on nutrition, undoubtedly. I think it is important. That's the way the world is going. I think it is absolutely a valid expectation to have from that industry. So I think it would be unwise for anybody in this category not to acknowledge that. And typically, I think the challenge has been for companies is to how to solve for the trade-off between taste and nutrition. And I think, therefore, relentless pursuit of that goal through more effective innovation so that you can offer great tasting products that are also good for you, I think is the direction in which most of these companies ought to be moving. We have a 3-point agenda on nutrition in our brands in India with Yum restaurants. One is complete disclosure. So have complete transparency so the consumers can choose what they wish to eat. Second, I think eliminate the obvious bads like trans fatty acids and oil, etc., which you know are not good for you, should be eliminated. And we are very, very committed to doing that. And the third is to offer choice, nutritive choice to our consumers that also tastes good. So I think that's our 3-point agenda. But I'd wholeheartedly support, the direction of the question that you posed, that it is something that needs to be acknowledged and needs to be solved for.
I was quite pleasantly surprised to know that Tommy Hilfiger has about 50 outlets. So I just wanted to know that what has been your promotional costs in smaller towns, tier 2 towns compared to the bigger towns, I mean per capita? I mean, do you have to do some different kind of promotions or more discounting?
Our whole business model is not heavy on promotion. We don't believe in it. So we have these 2 end-of-season sales. Other than that, we don't do much promotion or advertising or etc. So fundamentally, the big city or small city, we don't really spend money on promotion. Our whole focus, as you heard in the morning sessions, also on experience. We choose probably the best location in a mall, even if you have to pay higher rent. We take the best staff, visual merchandising standard, the imported product, quality of product. So the whole focus is how to give an experience which is very global. So internally, we call it like London, like New York. So whether we go to Indore or we go to Delhi, our focus is always like London, like New York. So in that business model, the promotion costs are not really high or very significant. And fortunately, there's not much of difference between a smaller town or a bigger town. That formula works. The experience focus works in most of the cities.
One of the panelists just said that they're looking for some differentiation in the food court. What exactly that you would mean about it?
Okay. The way food courts are organized in most malls are downright boring. You have one vegetarian kitchen, one Indian kitchen, one non-veg kitchen, one whatever. We're trying to differentiate, and hopefully with our next center in Bangalore, which will come up next year, we're trying to make the food court a place of choice rather than one where you have no choice and that's where you go to. So to that extent, we're trying to make it very experiential, very interactive with consumers. So it's a different attempt at a food court. And certainly we will not do a conventional food court. I think in any of our centers, I think those days of conventional food courts are gone. We have 10 kitchens, boring stuff, nobody likes it. Customers are forced because the other thing is the ratio of food and beverage in a center is changing. Typically it used to be 8, 10, 12%. It's now edging into the 15 to 20%. It's becoming that important. So again, whether it's in the food court or in the restaurant, we're trying to make it very experiential, very interactive.
All right, I think we'll have to call the session there, but thank you all for joining us. Dhiren, Shailesh, AD, Augustine, thanks for coming in, and welcome to India as well, Mr. Raghunandan, Venu, and Sriram. Round of applause for them, and we'll break for lunch.